I'm delighted to share this collaborative research study between the University of Hertfordshire in the UK and University of Castilla-La Mancha in Spain. My name is Suzanne Fergus and I am presenting on behalf of this team that includes Professor Alberto Notario and Professor Yolanda Diaz de Mera. You can see a picture of us on this slide. Are our students studying smart? And this was a question that we wanted to explore whether our students were using the more evidence-based effective study strategies compared to the more suboptimal study strategies, and had a critical awareness, that metacognitive awareness of their learning and understanding. Within higher education, we're very familiar with the deep learning and surface learning approaches. Deep learning is that purposeful intention to develop an understanding and link concepts together, compared to surface learning, which is more passive, focusing more on reproducing content. Meaningful learning, on one end of a continuum to rote learning, depends on the quantity and the quality of relevant knowledge by the learner, and also the efforts made to integrate new knowledge with existing relevant knowledge. A lot of what we look at is our approaches to teaching that can help to support meaningful learning, and in this study we are now putting the focus on what students are doing. It's the learner's contribution to that meaningful learning, particularly in their independent study time. I've included some references on these slides which you may find useful or interesting, and they'll be available on the slide deck. From cognitive psychology, particularly over the last years, there has been a lot of research, knowledge and evidence that helps us to understand better what are effective and evidence-based study strategies. Two of the most highly and widely reported strategies are retrieval practice, the testing effect, and distributed practice, the spacing effect. And I'm going to just briefly mention these before I move into our study. So retrieval practice, this is taking a test after a study period improves long-term retention compared to not taking a test, or compared to just restudying the material. Research published in Science that compared retrieval practice to a more active elaborative study approach, concept mapping. Concept mapping is where learners construct diagrams where there's relationships and links that are made between concepts, and it's this encoding of meaningful relationships among concepts that is a recommended active learning approach to use. What was found from this study, that retrieval practice showed greater gains in meaningful learning, up to by 1 standard deviation, compared to using a concept map. What I also found interesting from this study and from other studies around evidence-based learning strategies is that the learners involved in the study predict the reverse. So they will say, concept mapping, they will predict that will show greater learning gains compared to retrieval practice. Distributed practice is where distinctive study episodes are distributed over time. It's the opposite of cramming. Now, using distributed practice can help the discrimination of different problem types. So what's referred to as interleaving, where different concepts are mixed up rather than being presented in a block, can help learners to distinguish between similar concepts. This has been used very recently. A study I've shown here with in mathematics problems, where interleaving resulted in a higher score than a blocked group approach, and it was 61% versus 38%. I also want to quickly make reference to a fantastic website from the Learning Scientists where you can get a lot of great information about these different effective learning approaches. This study, I only have 10 minutes for this presentation, and it has been submitted for publication, but I am just going to share some of the key highlights. It involves students in Spain and the UK, first and second year students who are on applied chemistry programs. The survey itself was collected just prior to the pivot to online learning. although we have now carried out a more wider, larger scale study that incorporates aspects of online learning. But these students have a very similar entry requirement, above 50% for students in Spain, a grade C, which is 50 to 59% or above for A-level chemistry exam in the UK. The course modality in both locations is the same, so it is a good comparison to make across these two different cohorts. Obviously, ethical approval was obtained because it involves human participants. One of the questions, which was involving asking the students, they study that way because a teacher has taught them to study that way. That's not the case across both cohorts, and I'm going to come back to this towards the end when I'm making some final conclusions. In relation to organisation of study and deciding what to study next, there was a clear difference across both locations in relation to whatever's due soonest and whatever's overdue. 76% of the UK students are making the decision on what to study next based on deadlines. Whatever I haven't studied for the longest time, whatever I find interesting, that wasn't a strong driver for that decision. There was some difference, stronger and a higher number of responses for Spanish students in whatever I feel like I'm doing the worst in or planning using a schedule. Both sets of cohorts do have summative assessments, coursework assignments throughout the year, and also a final end-of-year exam. Returning to review course material was not a predominant strategy. This is also a reported result from other research. Looking at the study strategies that students regularly use, and I'm going to first focus on the more suboptimal study strategies. So recopying notes, not surprising, this is a strategy that is used by students. I'm aware of students telling me that they rewrite their notes out verbatim over and over as a way of learning. Rereading chapters, articles and notes, again, another suboptimal strategy where the more you read something, yes, the more familiar it appears to be because you've read it more times, but that doesn't transfer to better learning. Probably not a surprise, cramming lots of information the night before a test. There was a difference here between both cohorts with a higher percentage of students in the UK using this strategy. Not a surprise, as I said, this is one that we're familiar with from students using. Other strategies which are more effective, making diagrams, charts or pictures, there was a difference between both cohorts for that strategy. Asking questions or verbally participating during class, not a highly reported strategy used by students. This isn't really a surprise, and it's why we use technology to help create that inclusive learning environment. So polling tools such as Mentimeter to help encourage and engage students to communicate in ways that they feel safer. It's good to see students are using self-testing in their study strategies. This was one of the top 2 strategies reported. They're using this after they've studied as a way of testing their learning. They're not using retrieval practice testing to replace other suboptimal strategies. Implications of findings. So what does this tell us? Clearly there is a need for students to have a greater awareness and training on evidence-based study strategies. I have been running several workshops during this year for students on how to study smarter, and this has really helped to debunk some of their ways of thinking about learning. I've interviewed lots of students. I've been thinking and researching this for a number of years, and I also last year wrote a book on Study Smarter. I guess it was the book I wish I had as a student. For instructors, and it links back to that question 1, that students are not using strategies based on what they've been taught by a teacher. There are pervasive education myths such as learning styles that are still, widely considered to be valid and useful. And there is also a need for teachers to have an increased metacognitive awareness to include within their teaching. Thank you, and if you've got any questions, here is my email address.